Okay, this section is going to be about the MAP testing. I did share with you in February that in the March parent chat, I was going to talk a little bit more about the MAP testing and then share with you our data from this school year. So I'm going to give you just a brief overview on MAP testing. So as we know, not all students are the same. If you have multiple children, you know that your children, your first one, you parent one way, and then your second child comes along and you're thinking, I'm parenting them the same. What's going on? This child's reacting differently to my parenting. So we know that. That's the beauty of being a parent. That's the beauty of our children, is that they're all different. So what the MAP test does for us is it's a test that really is customized to the differences within children. MAP is used globally. It is used in over 9,500 schools, over 145 countries. So it is a test that has a lot of validity to it, and it's used in multiple schools. Our eighth graders that are going to Homestead places the students in their classes based on one criteria is their MAP score. They look at their MAP scores to help them know where that child is in the range for mathematics and ELA. There's other factors, but that's one score that they look at. So what is it? So it's a test that's administered in the fall and the spring, and you have the option of giving the test in the winter. Our second graders take the reading test and the mathematics test, and then our third through eighth graders take reading, math, and language usage. It's completely computer-based. It is an untimed test, so students have as many minutes as they need. Some kids take it over multiple days. Typically, it takes students 30 to 60 minutes per test, but some students do need 2 hours, and we usually break that up in the course of a couple days. Depending on the test, it'll range from 30 questions, 42, or 52 questions. It's a unique test because it's adaptive. So what this means is the tests like the Iowas, we're taking those right now in the school, those are standardized tests. And that test is going to give third grade, for example, those questions are what third graders should know. So it's measuring our third graders against what a third grade student should know. So when you get those results back, if you have a child in the 99th percentile, it's comparing them just to third graders. So they're in the 99th percentile, 98% of the kids will do better than them on that test. They're at the top. But what we don't know is that child performing in the fourth grade or fifth grade level? We don't know because they weren't given fourth and fifth grade level questions. MAP, on the other hand, adapts and adjusts to how your child's answering the questions live. So every child will start with the first question. That's the same. So when a third grader sits down in the fall, they'll receive the same first question. Then based how that child answers that question, we'll decide what the second question is. So if they get the question right, it will present them with a little bit harder question. And it'll keep getting harder if they keep getting them right. And then once they start getting questions wrong, then it'll give them a little bit easier question. And what it's trying to do is level out to see what level that child's performing at. So we could have a third grader who is receiving seventh grade level questions in front of them. The beauty is and the fun part about administering this as an administrator or a teacher in the classroom is when you're walking around, all the students are answering different questions. It's really leveling them out. Hence the first slide with all of those students, they're all different. So they're all going to have different questions. The goal is to get 50% correct and 50% inaccurate, and that's where you kind of level out and find out where that child is at. The final score is an estimate of that child's achievement level. So we use this, it's one snapshot of that child on that day. We don't put all our eggs in one basket on this score. It's really the best use of it is to look longitudinally or over time. So although we look at a fall score, the best use of this is to look at a child, usually fourth or fifth grade, because then you're going to start to see some patterns to see where they're performing. By eighth grade, you'll have a second through eighth grade history of testing, and you can really see that most kids are performing, in that same range for that specific child. It also gives us subtopic areas, so not just a math score, but it'll give us a score in operations. It'll give us a score in data, how that child is doing in data. It'll give us a score in algebraic thinking. So we can really drill down to see where the strengths and weaknesses are within that content area. That becomes really important, again, as they get to be in the third, fourth, and fifth grade levels as they get older. And then we can compare them to national averages. So we can look at a third grader and say, what do most third graders in globally, how do most third graders score when we look at the norms for that class? So we can compare your child against third graders, but it gives us their score in a RIT score, which I'm going to talk about in a second here. So one thing to remember, it is not a grade and it's not an evaluation, and it's really just one snapshot. So sometimes parents get super concerned if their child's score fell or if it didn't meet their growth goal. It's okay. We look over time. If we start to see a pattern, so if the fall score fell and the winter score fell, we're getting a little bit concerned that something's going on, and we would start to put in some interventions depending on how far that child fell as well. So it's something that we don't panic in the moment. We don't say, oh my gosh, my child's at the 40th percentile, I need a tutor. No, this is one test, one day. We also want to factor in the child's classroom performances, how they're doing on math assessments, reading assessments. We have the Iowa standardized test that comes. So we take all of this data and look at it together. So the scores are given in a RIT. So if you look on this picture, you'll see it's like a growth chart. So it's an equal interval chart. And instead of measuring height, we're measuring the academic ability. It shows the change in their academic growth. And just like when your child grows in heights, sometimes there's a rapid growth and sometimes they stay stagnant. So that happens with children. You take them in for their annual checkup and you're like, they didn't really grow much. But then the next year, there's this huge change. The same thing happens in academics. We know kids all grow at different rates, and it's compared against the norms or the averages within a group. One thing to remember is that, again, it isn't a one size fits all or to panic on one score. There's a lot of factors here. So the testing environments, some kids don't do well in tests, so that might affect their scores. Some students might come in and they didn't sleep well the night before. That could affect their score. They might have something on their mind. So maybe they yelled at on the way to school, or maybe they had a fight with their brother, or maybe their pet is sick. So there's things to keep in mind whenever you're looking at data and you're looking at children. So here's how you're going to look at your child's report. And I'm going to bring one up really quickly here. So when you get your child's report, the beauty of MAP is that it's going to give you this little synopsis of what I really just talked about here in a summary version. What you're going to see is you're going to see the subject. So you'll see mathematics, and you'll see this is a sample. This child is in the low average achievement. So the child's scoring in the 39th percentile, and that's against this child's grade level. We can see the history. So since this child started taking tests in the fall, this child was at a 185. And we can see there was some flat growth here. This is when COVID hit. So there was that time period. So the child did not make much growth. This dotted line is the growth they should have made. So this child should have been up here. Now MAP adjusted it for COVID. So they did show that COVID piece. So they are not too far apart from where they should. But what's really important to see is that that gap is narrowing. So that child's made some really great growth, because we want this to be where that dotted line is, so that they're on average. This shows the growth. So from the fall to winter, the growth is in the 86th percentile. So this child had high growth, which you can see as evident in this graph as well. And the same goes for reading. It'll be the same type of thing. As the administrator and as teachers, we're looking at, again, this is longitudinal. So I'm looking at this snapshot to say, there's a curve here. Like, this is not good. But then, wow, look what happened. That child now exceeded what they should be. High growth. They're now in the 61st percentile. They made up the losses that they had. It's going to give you some questions to ask your teachers. The report will also take you to the website, which has some toolkits, and you can do some sample tests if you want to as a parent. Okay, now everything, this is what you've been waiting for, I know, is what does the Lumen Christi data look like? This is the last part here. Sorry, you already saw this. Okay, so here we go. Our data for Lumen Christi is, I don't think I can move this here, I think we're fine. So here's the math data for the fall of 2020. I have the blue is our Lumen Christi average for that grade, and then the red is the national average. So we can see that Lumen Christi isn't too far ahead of the national average. 7th and 8th grade in math, they were this significantly higher in 7th grade, but pretty much we're on par with the average. Now, comparing fall. So typically, this is what our bars look like. So last fall, you can see Lumen Christi students are performing above the average in the nation. So you can see, did COVID affect us? Yes, you can see it did. We're not nowhere below the average, which is great, but we are very much closer to average than we had been in years past. On the reading side, this was the fall of 2020, not as bad. And this is what we predicted. Educators predicted that kids would come in not as low in math because it's something you tell your kid, go read a book. And a lot of kids like to read. So they sort of stayed afloat in the area of reading. Math is a little more difficult for families to intervene on at home. And then here's the comparison. So typically, again, this is what we see in reading. Kind of looks almost the same. So we didn't see as much of a dip in our kids for reading. Here's math. Now this is the growth. So this is not national average. This is now Lumen Christi against Lumen Christi. So in math, 2nd grade, this is where the average 2nd grade child was in the fall in math. And here's where they are now as of about 2 weeks ago. So this difference here is the amount of growth that that class made. 3rd grade, here was the fall, the average, now they're up here. So we can see huge growth in the lower grades. That's completely typical because there is more growth to make. They're just on the learning spectrum, so they make usually more significant growth in the younger grades, but still we see growth all across the board, which is fabulous. And then here's reading. This is, again, it's typical to see a lot of growth in 2nd grade. They learn to read in 1st grade and then they just kind of explode in 2nd grade. So that's our growth. As far as numbers go, this is the last slide here. We can see that what this is showing you is how the percentage of students who met their growth goal. So MAP will set a goal to say, here's your fall score. Here's how much you should grow by the winter. 84% of our 2nd graders met their growth goal in math, and 88% met it in reading. I'm not going to read these to you. You can see this picture here. But what's important to see is that we're well above 50, 60%. These are really fantastic numbers when we look at what the kids came in with. And we're in somewhat of a restricted environment. This is really impressive. Kids have been working very hard, as evident by this data, as well as our teachers have been working extremely hard. And what is nice to see is that our kids are on par with where they should be at this time for the most part. So kids, I don't want to say they're caught back up, but we're seeing them perform at similar levels that they have been in years past. If you have any questions on MAP, always know that I'm here to answer your questions. I'm here to help you walk you through your child's test scores. Your child's teacher as well can give you a lot of data on your child specifically, how they're specifically performing, but I can give you some answers on those more high level areas.